we have our next guest. Welcome to the Temple of Technology.
Boom. What's going on?
How you
How
doing?
Hello,
are you?
hello. Thank you for having me. Long time listener, first time caller.
Let's go.
Fantastic.
Let's go.
Amazing. Well, we were just talking about Klarna. We were talking to Andrew Reed. We were talking about how he's in a quiet period, can't talk about it, but maybe you can. Maybe you can take us through any of the interesting S1s you've deep dived. But first, introduce yourself. What do you do, and why do you deep dive these companies?
Sure. I'm Tanay. I'm a partner at Wing, which is an early stage venture firm. We invest at the seed and Series A in primarily B2B companies, heavy emphasis on data and AI. My journey with S1s dates to even prior to being an investor. I think I've always been just a huge business nerd, I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
I view S1s as the time when a company kind of lifts the curtain and gives you a peek into the business. And typically these are good companies, right? Because they've made it to the point of publishing an S1. Maybe once in a while you do get like a WeWork or something out there, but by and large these are generally good companies. And I think in every S1, different ways to read it. Obviously, there are public market investors that are making a decision on, hey, should we invest in this? How should we value this thing if we would invest? All of that. I think the lens that I generally take on it as someone that's not necessarily actively trying to make that call, at least in a professional setting, is more what are the lessons from this business that one you can just learn to learn from about business in general. But then two, I think there are a lot of interesting things about many businesses that could be applicable even at the earliest stage. Both is in terms of what's going on today. So, for example, any S1 today, a lot of AI washing in them, whether or not AI is related. I think it just tells you where things are at in the current state of the market, which is, I think, an important thing to know, just given how quickly things are changing and how there's so much kind of noise and unclear where the signal comes. And I think you do get some signal from it. And I think the second is like, depending on the kind of company it is, there's a lot that kind of similar startups, maybe that are even 10 years earlier, can take from it in terms of almost like lessons and playbooks of, oh, how did they solve that? How did they grow their TAMs over time? How did they figure out reaching these customers that are maybe difficult to reach? And so one good example of that is a company like Service Titan, which went public recently. I think any company building a vertical AI, any founder building a vertical AI company should be understanding Service Titan to figure out how do they expand all the products that they have, how do they grow their ACVs within their customer set, because it's a problem and a question that they're going to get in every financing round, but a problem they're going to face as they grow that business. And there are some good kind of lessons in there about that.
I remember when I think when Snapchat published their S1, it revealed how much they were spending on the cloud, and that might have moved cloud budgets. Have you ever seen an S1 that's been almost like a bull signal for a startup, in the sense that like you can see a line item on some company that's going public and, hey, they're spending a lot of money on this Series B company. We got to go talk to them and see if we can do the next round?
Oh, I think there have been a few like that, in terms of it just tells you that some spaces are
Sure.
ripping as well. And I do think like this CoreWeave one is going to lead to a lot of other interest in, for example, the data center more broadly. Because I think what's happening is that these basically all the big tech companies are spending $200 billion a year of capex on that buy, right? And obviously Nvidia is like the big winner and the beneficiary of
Mm-hmm.
that. But reading through CoreWeave, I mean, CoreWeave is like such a small pie, but it's like Microsoft's like 60% of their revenue in like a year, right? And they're growing that revenue from 20 million to 2 billion in like 2 years. Like, what companies have done that in the past? And I think what it tells you is that there's just so much demand at that layer of the stack right now, that if you have a compelling solution there, even if you take up like a small pie of like the budgets, you can race into these hundreds of millions of revenue very quickly. So I actually think this one is going to be like part of, is going to renew some of the interest. And there has been a lot of interest in that chip companies and all of that,
Yeah.
but in other areas and almost like that data center stack, just because there's so much spend and so much build out still happening. And so I think that's actually a good one in terms of in present day even.
Yeah, you guys?
How have, feels like CoreWeave is actively sort of positioning itself to make sure that they're trying to sort of like get in front of the core questions, which is like, hey, you have some of these big contracts. They're long-term contracts, but they're not super long-term.
Like
so
revenue
they're sort
concentration too.
yeah, revenue concentration issues. They've been working on this big, OpenAI deal. Do you think that investors will even care? Obviously, you're not a professional public markets investors, but do you think the market just wants like a pure play stock like CoreWeave? Is that part of why they should just get out and maybe the revenue concentration doesn't matter? Because we're in this we're in the meme market still, and in many ways, business fundamentals don't matter. It's so much around narratives,
vibes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think in this initial period, I think how CoreWeave trades is very much going to be about narratives and vibes and memes. And speaking of memes, I mean, this is a company that was started by 3 former commodity traders that, basically got a bunch of GPUs together to mine crypto and then pivoted to AI, right? And this is the Web3 to AI pivot done right. And it's,
right.
going to be like whatever, $25 billion company in like a few, in like 6 years, basically. So it's kind of incredible in that sense. I think onto your core questions, I think so much of it is going to be around that. I think like the public market investors who are going to think about it professionally are viewing this as like, do they have the potential of becoming like this kind of AI hyperscaler or this AI cloud? And, they'll talk about, we have the 15 billion from OpenAI commitments over the next 6 years coming through. We have a bunch of 15 billion of performance obligations from prior contracts that are already going to hit over the next 3 to 4 years. But then on the flip side, you have Satya going on podcast saying that, hey, I'm glad that we're a leaser of capacity because there's going to be a surplus of supply over 3-4 years. So that isn't a farewell for, is this going to continue beyond that potentially for them? And I do think it's one of those where into timing, I think this is the moment in time, right? This is the time when there are some people that feel like they missed the boat on NVIDIA, some, especially including the retail investors, right? Who are like, oh, this is now a new pure play generative AI workload company. And so I do think it's good timing from that. The other thing though, is they need the capital because they do lose a decent amount of money on like a free cash flow basis. I think they lost like $6 billion last year. And so they have some cash in the bank, but they do need the capital. And so it feels like a good time for them to get out and, play into these memes and narratives and also, obviously allow some of the early investors to like.
Sorry, you can't hear it, but he just played the loudest gong sound because of how big the $6 billion is.
How much money they were losing.
We really
got to figure out how the
guests
can hear the sound
If
effects.
you don't get the joke, it's not going to land.
We're just cracking up.
Anyway, I want to stay on CoreWeave. There's been this narrative of like, will they get out? Won't they? I saw Martin Shkreli say, oh, they're 5x oversubscribed now. Can you just take me through like, what is the emotional roller coaster that a company or CEO or even a public markets investor goes on when one of these S1s drops? There's the quiet period, and then there's the S1, and then later there's the IPO. And like, what is the normal cadence, and what should people be paying attention to?
Yeah, unfortunately, no personal experience in that. It would have been nice to take a company public, but no, I do think it's definitely a stressful period for them in terms of just, and especially when there is so many questions around it, right? Like there was some rumors about Microsoft not being like trying to break free of some of their obligations, which they've now dispelled. So with this one, there's some added kind of just question marks on, is this going to happen? The Cerebras, which filed last year, had similar issues, and there was some CFIUS kind of just investigations that have taken longer, and it's of held back their IPO. And so it is one of those where now I think there's some rumors that the founders here have sold a decent amount of secondary already. So I'm sure, they're probably that probably helps a little bit, especially when it's like 450 million worth. But ultimately, it still is. It does look like it's going to go ahead now, but I can imagine it's going to still be a crazy kind of first few months once it does start trading as well, just given so much uncertainty around it.
Can you comment on what you think might be going out in the next year? What people are excited for? What kind of names are people chomping at the bit to read the S1s?
We saw, wasn't it Stripe?
I mean, you imagine it's everything on that most in-demand secondary once you're in the decacorn category, but I want to know.
Yeah, and I'd even love your take on. Do you think Figure's gonna bring back the SPAC? Have you heard any rumblings? Probably can't say, but I'd be curious.
Yeah, I think in terms of what people would be excited to get out, I do think Stripe is definitely one of those. I don't know if they plan to go public anytime soon, given that they seem to be tapping into the secondary markets pretty often and providing liquidity to employees, potentially to some other investors as well. And so maybe not an immediate need. There are a few that are rumored to be filing soon, such as Chime, which I think will be an interesting one on the fintech side. I think the markets would really love like a, like an AI company going public. I think CoreWeave is one example of that, but like, like I don't see an OpenAI or something like that anytime soon, but maybe like if one of those kind of labs decides to do it, I think that would be like pretty interesting. I think the application layer AI companies are probably still a bit too early, is my guess. And so I do think we'll see some. And I think one of the interesting things is that CoreWeave is relatively young, right? It's about 7 years old as a company, but Klarna, which filed, is like almost 20 years old. And then StubHub, which also I believe is filed, I actually haven't gone through that one yet, is also like a 20-year-old company. And so these are some of the ones that have been like, people have been waiting for these to go public for a really, really, really long time. And so it's nice to see some of them start to get out. And I do think we might see some younger companies start to go, just given how fast the AI boom is. But I think it might be another couple of years before we get like a true AI native company out in the public markets.
I've heard a little bit of rumbling from investors that track the CFO hiring cycles at the large later stage growth stage decacorn companies. And they say, hey, this CFO that just got hired at this company, he took his last 3 companies public within 18 months of getting hired. We know what's up. Is that a valuable signal for anyone, or is that just some like kind of fun fact in Silicon Valley?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think the timing can vary though from that hire in terms of, but generally, especially some companies don't even have a CFO. And so when they bring one in, some people believe it's like this now starting to at least think about it. But I do think it could be that it's imminent, like a year from now. It could be like it still might take 2 to 3 years because some of the internal controls and things like that. Like CoreWeave, for example, had like a note in its filing that they found like weaknesses in their internal reporting and controls, which obviously is not great to from like someone who would be a prospective investor looking at that. And so some companies just like to do it a little bit earlier to make sure that there's none of that ahead of when they actually file.
Yeah. You have any questions?
You got one?
I just want to have you back on the next time a big S1 drops.
I'd love for it to be a regular appearance.
This would be awesome when you drop a new deep dive. And I definitely want to know just what the next big S1 will be. It's is there a poly market for this yet? I want to bet on that.
that would be good. Yeah, that would be good. And it might actually incentivize them to actually go public, which maybe isn't the worst thing in the world. I did want to leave with, I'm sure you've seen the DoorDash memes about Klarna. Please break that down. Here's a fun fact from the filing. So Klarna is registered. It has like a banking license in Europe. And so they basically get deposits from people in Germany and Netherlands and places like that. And so that money is being used to fund the interest-free loans. And so basically what's going on is that the European savings are being used to fund like the Americans ordering burritos on
Let's go!
I thought it was just incredible. It's like American exceptionalism at its peak. Like the American consumer is the winner yet again.
Amazing. Undefeated. Nothing can stop the American consumer. It's the most powerful force in the world.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This is a really wonderful chat.
Give us a heads up when next time you're dropping.
We'd love to have you on the same day.
We'll awesome. Slot you in, and I look forward to it.
Awesome. Really enjoyed this, and thanks for having me. And looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Thanks so much. Bye.